Greetings, how are you doing today, everybody? Now, this video is going to be a bit of a review, one of my first of many that I'm going to be making, and this video is specifically for the Secrets of Magic playtest that Paizo has recently released. This one's going to go into the depth about the Magus class, how it compares to the first edition version, what changes, and my thoughts on the overall class. So for those of you that are unaware, Magus is basically a hybrid between a warrior and a wizard. You train some of your magical abilities to be a bit more combat orientated. You can use weapons, and in the old edition there were various ways they did it. So this is my experience on it based on my experience as the dungeon master. I've done some work with Maguses in first edition. I haven't playtested it in second edition, but this is just based on what they've released. So let's go through. The first thing to note is the hit points, 8 plus your con mod. So looking at it for second edition, most classes are at the 8 to 10. The barbarians are at 12, and the pure spellcasters like sorcerer, witch, wizard are at 6. So it's on the low end, but nothing too terrible. Key ability being strength of dex also shows that it's definitely more focused on you being that frontline, being that damage in terms of like your martial skills, and less like your intelligence. This part's all like kind of the fluff that kind of explains why you would play the class. What I do want to show is over here on the right side. Being trained in martial weapons opens up a lot more weapons unarmed. Trained in medium armor means you can wear medium armor right off the bat. I believe in first edition you learned that ability at a higher level. It wasn't automatically at level 1. Same thing with unarmored defense, so you can kind of, and unarmored attacks. So that may play into some things later. I'll show you some feats that make an interesting build. Now, this just gives you the whole Magus advancement tree and all the spellcasting, and the main thing to look at is this chart, which when I saw it, when my players first saw it, we were a bit confused by it, because as you see, as you level up, you actually start losing access to older spell slots. And you only really have 4 spell slots max at any time, but you get stronger spells. In first edition, the Magus was what was called a partial spellcaster, and they only stopped at 6th level, and they had a specific spell list. And here in second edition, they moved it so where you are a full spellcaster at 9th, and you have the full arcane spell list. There's not a specific separate list for Magus. It usually had a bit less spells. Now this is good and bad in a few reasons. Usually your 6th spell level spellcasters in first edition, they learn their spells a bit behind. So for instance, when a wizard would have learned teleport, the Magus had to wait a few more levels before they would learn teleport. This, however, is interesting that you only get 4 slots. You do have your cantrips, and obviously the cantrips will probably be more of your bread and butter, especially now in second edition where they auto heighten, so they get stronger as you level up, as opposed to first edition where they were kind of just pointless after a while. This may not limit your options in battle, so I am curious to see how that plays out. And I'm skipping this part because there's all like what's cantrips and heightening and all that stuff. So this is the part where things get interesting, and this is so for those of you who play first edition Magus, or if you're not aware, Magus in first edition had a lot going on with it. You had spell combat, which let you basically 2-weapon fight with a weapon and a spell. You had spell strike, which allowed you to cast a spell into a weapon and then attack. And you even had, like, what we call knowledge, where you could like recall spells that you've already cast, or recall spells that you've already that you may not have prepared for the day. It was a lot to keep track of. They cleaned out most of that. Spell combat doesn't seem to be a thing anymore. Instead, it's all focused on that spell strike ability, which is what they call striking spell. So the way it works is, and they kind of explain it here, is you free action activate this ability. The next thing is to cast a spell, which normally takes 2 actions, into your weapon or your body, and then your third is to do the attack. So basically it's a full round. Now there's something later on in the synthesis that we can kind of show how this works, but it basically means it seems to be a lot more towards spell striking. The other thing to keep in mind for this is this wording actually is a bit different, and people may not notice it at first. It says any spell that targets one creature or object. In the old version, it specifically mentioned touch spells only. Now, obviously, in 2nd edition, there is no touch AC, and there are some touch spells, but it means that you can cast your ability for spells you can cast into your weapon has now greatly increased. And there's even feats that allow you to even increase that option. This unarmed attack, you'll see as a feat, allows you to essentially be able to punch with your spells as well. You also hear along the Magus Potency Battle Spell. It's your focus spell, is what they would call it in 2nd edition. And basically, I forget what it's called in 1st edition, which is funny because I'm playing a Magus in my Kingmaker game on the PC. Basically, it lets you enchant your weapon. So it kind of makes it a +1 weapon, and as it levels up, you can make it a stronger weapon. So for instance, in 2nd edition, you make it a +1 potency, then later on it becomes a +1 striking, and so forth and so forth. And this just kind of goes into the fact like how the roles work in terms of like discharging the spell, and how you can store it in one turn and then hit it the next turn if you have to. Synthesis. These are the ones I was talking about. So these classes seem to have different options. Like I think Druid has Orders, and ranged have Hunter's Edge, and so forth and so forth. So we've got 3 different options for the Magus. The first is a Shooting Star. Shooting Star reads that you can extend your magic to use ranged weapons. So now you can use bows, crossbows, that kind of stuff with it. And it says so instead of, it kind of delivers it through the ammunition. And you can see, this is an interesting spot I didn't actually read until just now. The range of the spell comes into play here. So what this means is you can't actually... So that's actually not that good, not that I'm reading it for you guys. Like this is live action right now. That means that you cannot trigger a touch spell on a ranged attack of 30. So that's really bad. I mean, there are some spells you can do ranged, like they have like, 100-foot range. But like you can't like shock and grasp a bow now. Well, you couldn't anyway, but I mean, you can shock and grasp a bow, and you can't use any of these like short range spells on a long range attack. Probably not the best, but slide casting, this is the one that most people are gonna probably use. This is like probably the main one, and this means this allows you to move while casting the spell. So if you remember before, we talked about it was free action to activate the striking spell fee. 2 actions right now, there are feats to reduce it to 1 action. As you see, it says 1 action or more. To cast a spell, and then the last action to hit. Now what this says is you can actually either move, cast a spell, hit, or cast a spell into the weapon, move, and then hit. So this lets you cast that spell and then move into range to actually attack. Because casting a spell still is a manipulate action, which means that you will provoke from anybody who has that ability to attack you. Also, a little caveat here as well, kind of throwback to the spell combat in a way. You need to have your other hand free, so you can go sword, shield, and do it. You still need the hand to cast the spell. The last one is Sustaining Steel, and this one is this is an interesting one, I must say. It's something I didn't really expect to see. This is almost like if you want to make like a Magus tanky or like a frontline Magus. This lets you do it in a 2-handed weapon. And base a big weapon, like some of those great swords and stuff like that. You essentially gain temporary hit points every time you use your striking spell. So you can kind of keep yourself up a little bit by just doing these attacks. That's an interesting one. I'm not sure how that would play out, but it could be fun to make like kind of like mags that keeps healing themselves every time they attack. I'm not gonna go through all this. This is like the basic, like when you get your feats, when your skill increases and all that stuff, when your stuff increases like to expert and legendary and all that. That's all the same. Not the same, but kind of like the same verbiage. I'll go over double spell strike because it's unique. This lets you basically when you do your spell strike ability, it lets you kind of echo the spell effect, so you can use it next turn as well, but it's weaker. I'm not sure how good that is in terms of like a 19th level ability, but for free, I mean, there's no harm in that. Now, however, comes the feats, and the feats are where things are going to get interesting because there's a lot of them, and some of them are good. So, Arcane Fist. This one lets you basically be a Magus monk. You could either be a Magus that just does unarmed attacks and unarmed defense, or you could actually multi-class as a Magus and a monk. But this basically means that you can punch people essentially with your spellcasting. Common Assessment isn't much. It just lets you get a free, not free, but it still takes an action. So it lets you do an attack to get a free recall knowledge check. Skew materials, just typical sorcerer stuff. Familiar, same thing, you just gain a familiar, which could be interesting. There's some familiar feats here. Raised Tome is kind of funny. So basically what Raised Tome means is, if you have, I don't know why you would have a book in your hand while in battle, but you could basically use the book as like a shield for like one AC, and you actually gain recall knowledge while you have the book in your hand. I'm not sure who would use that. Like, besides being a bit trolly, I'm not sure why you would choose to raise a tome. This is where things get better. Cantrip expansion. You prepare 2 additional cantrips a day. So now instead of going 5 cantrips, you get 7. And as you saw, you only have 4 other spell slots. So this lets you now you have 4 spell slots and 7 cantrips. So you have a bit more versatility in what you can cast. Enhanced Familiar is just another familiar boost. Nothing crazy about that. Spirit Sheath. This is if you really want to go like start to go a bit anime here. Basically you can hide your weapon in a portal. So you could just go and just whip out your weapon like magically. Pretty cool. Maybe worth it. Don't know, depending on your cantrip selection, I would say either this or the expansion for a second level feat. Big spell strikes. This could be an interesting one as well, depending on what you want to do. And basically what it means is, so you cast one of those spells not as a spell strike, but as a normal spell. Part of its energy goes into your weapon and does extra damage for it. And you can see, depending on what type of spell you cast, the damage type changes. So this makes your attack a bit more powerful. Spell parry, that just lets you parry against spells. Steady spell casting, I would probably recommend this as well, because if you're casting a spell within melee range, you get risk against like a fighter who has a reaction. It pretty much gives you a chance to prevent things from being disrupted. Striker's Scroll lets you pretty much do spell striking with a scroll. You essentially tie a scroll to your weapon. It's weird. I mean, I know it says it blends in, but like, it's still weird. But it could be useful. Because by doing Striker's Scroll, that 4 spell slot you have now becomes like 5, well not 5, because you can put a scroll on a weapon and then you don't need that spell prepared. Energized Strikes. Again, that just pretty much means it just makes your weapon do additional damage. See, 1 per weapon damage die, so it doesn't do much overall, but it does some extra damage. This one is probably a big one, I think. So it says when your ability to cast 3rd level spells, so that means you have to be like level 5, I believe. Double checking. Make sure I'm not wrong. Yeah. And I know it's a 6th level feat, but so obviously 6th level, but at least 5 is to cast 3rd level spells. You gain 2 1st level spell slots, which you wouldn't have at the time, and you can prepare specific spells for them. So like Mage Armor, Jump, Fleet Step, True Strike. So these are like utility spells. And as you increase in levels, you start to gain more. Those 1st level can become 2 2nd level. And then you gain Water Breathing, Spider Climb, Resist Energy. Same next time you go to 3rd level, you gain Fleet to Fins and Haste. And eventually, when you get 6th level spells, you gain Fly and Freedom of Movement as spells. So you gain some utility spells outside those 4 you have. I think this is going to be a big one for those that feel very limited by the 4 spell slot build. Spell countermeasures just gives you that focus spell, which is at the end of this. We'll take a peek at that. Capture spell, which is a build on the spell parry that we saw before. And it basically means that when you resist a spell, you capture the magic into your weapon. So basically, you resist it and you actually copy that spell into your weapon, storing it. It might be an interesting way for you to like not have to go do the whole striking spell, cast spell every time. You just go absorb it and throw it back. Standby spell. This lets you essentially just keep 1 spell on standby, as it says. It lets you have a spell that you don't need to prepare anymore. It also it doesn't have to specifically be a spell slot. I think. Let's just make sure. The spell that you could use with Qriken Summoner has a level no higher than the highest level Magus spell slot. You can cast. No, sorry. Take it wrong. You can cast a spell without having prepared ahead of time by expending a spell slot. So you still need to use a spell slot. It just means, say you have a spell that doesn't make sense to have prepared all the time, but it might be useful. Keep it on standby. This one gives you another focus spell. Spell swipe is basically cleave with your thing. So instead of you attacking and hitting one person, you can hit 2 people with it and discharge the spell. The thing to note about this is it is a 2 action ability, which means that you will have to store the spell 1 turn, release it the next turn. So it's a bit of a build up for that. Cascading Ray. That is a lot of trigger, but basically it kind of takes the damage from your elemental damage, as you see, and it pretty much allows it to like overflow and allow you. So say you cast an electricity attack against someone, it shoots off to another person and does some damage against that person as well. Bit more utility, I can see. I mean, we'll see compared to some of these if it's worth it, but let's see how much damage it does. So it does the same damage that the spell would do. So that's pretty good actually. Comet spell. So this is for the shooting star synthesis. And basically anybody who is between you and the target when you cast that spell takes damage equal to the level. So equal to the spell's level. So even at like, even if you were casting a 9th level spell, that's 9 force damage. If it's an evocation one, that's 13 points of damage. It's a bit of AoE, but not that great. Healer Steel. This is for the sustaining one. Which, as you know, you gain temporary hit points when you do that ability. And this one actually heals you instead of just giving temporary hit points. So that's a lot better. Like compared to Comet spell, this one's a lot better. Portal Slide. Again, you can kind of see the level 10s where you get the option to like upgrade your synthesis basically. This one lets you teleport basically, as opposed to having to move. You can just jump to a specific spot. This is the way to get past that reaction of having to worry about getting hit by an attack of opportunity. The interesting thing about this as well, so you teleport up to half your speed. So you're looking at like 10 to 12 feet, maybe. But if it's a conjuration or transmutation, you double it. So that means your full speed. So you're looking at 20, 25 feet, depending on your equipment. So not bad. So it's like a short little teleport. I would still say of these three, I would say Healer Steel is probably better than Portal Slide, only because of the limitation on the distance, and the Comet spell is pretty weak. Qriken Spell Strike, this is one of those ones I talked about before. You can basically reduce the number of actions to cast a spell. So now it becomes 1 action to cast it instead of 2. That's pretty big. Only thing that's annoying is it is once per day. So that does actually make it... I didn't see that until just now. Once per day. So that means you can only do... That's a pretty tough restriction. So you only have that one turn where you can really buff it out. Bespell resistance. Bespell was the one that added the whenever you cast a spell, that added that elemental damage to it. And this one just makes it also do persistent damage, a little bit more damage. Magic Sense. This pretty much gives you free detect magic on at all time. And Overwhelming Spell Strike allows you to essentially bypass resistances for your elemental attacks. This one's pretty good, I would say, maybe. Although it does take an action, so it's not, you can't do with that, but you could so you can't like come into the spell strike, I think, unless you do Qriken. No, you can't even. So you have to cast a spell and then next turn discharge it with an Overwhelming Spell Strike, or you could just do cast a spell, Overwhelming Spell Strike. So you can still do it. We're good. We're good. 14th level, we're almost there, guys. There's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of feats here, and some of them are kind of interesting. So this lets you once per turn, kind of whenever you cast a spell, you gain benefits based on what you cast. Heroism, Force Life, Invisibility gives you a bit like a free buff essentially on yourself. Haste Assault lets you learn another focus spell, and preternatural parry. I had to like think of that one for a second. Essentially just increases your parry reaction, gives you +2 to your AC and saving throws, so not bad. Dispelling Spell Strike, 2 actions, and pretty much allows you to dispel magic when you hit somebody with it. So, do you have to discharge it? Yeah, if this strike discharge, so when you discharge a spell, you can counteract, you can do a dispel magic. Now remember, this is a 2 action, so you can't do it on the same turn that you actually store the spell in. Effortless Concentration, 3. This lets you to sustain your spells basically. And there's no like restriction on it, you just can sustain your spells without having to actually spend an action to do it. Second Chance lets you, if you miss, the spell isn't discharged from the shot and you keep the spell in. I believe the spell automatically gets discharged on the next attack. Let's actually just double check to make sure that that is correct. So if you hit with a melee strike, that'll be done because you're multiple dots. So does it actually? So does it actually? Hold on. Let's reread this one again, guys. Oh, I see what this means. My bad. My bad. Rewind. What this means is when you hit and the spell goes off, if they saved against the spell or if the spell attack roll missed, then it doesn't get discharged and you can keep it saved. Okay. That's not bad. That's pretty bad. That's pretty good. Versatile Spell Strike. You can use a Spell Strike to cast Infinite Potential. So this means you take one of your spell slots of the 4 you only have, remember 4, and you can pretty much save it to cast any spell of 2 levels lower than it. So if you have a 7th level spell, you can cast any 5th or lower spell with it. Okay, that's. But depending on how you want to play it, I could see either of these being useful. Supreme Spell Strike, the capstone feats. You're permanently quickened. So you gain a free strike or a free stride. Nope, sorry. There's a free strike. So that means you can now all those things that used to have like 2 abilities, you can now kind of use that to strike with your weapon. And Whirlwind spell is a 3-action one, which lets you essentially just AoE everybody next to you. That's pretty cool. I don't know if I would have that as the capstone, but it's pretty cool. Now these are the focus spells. So this was the one that you get from level 1, and as you see, it starts out with a +1 weapon potency, moves on to striking, and then a +2 striking, and eventually a +3 greater striking. So it does buff up quite a bit. Hasted Assault was another one that you learned, and this one lets you gain the quicken action for up to a minute. So it gives you that quicken ability for at least a short period of time. So that's not bad. That's a decent focus spell. Runic Impression just allows you to essentially enchant your weapon with a particular rune. I believe some classes could do that. I know the Paladin in 1st edition could do it. I believe Magus did it as well. That you could just like you could enchant the weapon with a specific ability. Makes you a bit more versatile. And countermeasures just gives you extra defenses +2 and resistance +5. So, overall, what do we think of the Magus playtest? So we have 3 different type of characters: the Shooting Star, the Heightened Steel, what's it called? Sustaining Steel, and the Slide Casting. I would say Shooting Star is probably the lowest on my list of types. The limit on the range, the Comet spell not being all that great. This is that you just kind of be a bit of a range, and maybe you focus more on those spell slots than doing your spell striking stuff. Sustaining Steel would be my second one, only because I haven't seen it in action. With the fact that you only have 8 hit points per level. If you were 10, maybe that one might be a bit more hardy, but with how damage is in 2nd edition, I don't know if I want to risk that. And then Slide Casting is probably the best one. Just giving you the ability to move, cast a spell, move in, hit. There's a lot of versatility. You can even cast a spell, bounce out if you need to, and then next turn come in and hit. So there's a lot of options with that. I think that the issue with the Magus that they have is the Magus in 1st edition was too complicated, and they kind of wanted to make it a bit more streamlined, but by doing so they kind of restricted some of the spell powers. Like the 4 spell slot thing is interesting. It means you're going to be relying on your cantrips a lot, I feel like, without proper testing, to be popping into your spell strikes. And if I did the math, for instance, at like 5th level, So your cantrip would be 3rd level. You're looking at, say you have a longsword. You buff it up with the magic potency, so now it's a +1 striking longsword. You cast Chill Touch into it, let's say. So you're doing 2d8 plus 3d4. Let's say you have an 18 strain, so it's a +4. So you're looking at about 9 points from the 2d8, another 7.5 from the Chill Touch on average. So 16.5 plus the 420. So you're looking about 21 points of damage in a turn that you can pretty much just spam over and over. So it's a decent effect, but doesn't make it fun. Like, will this be too restrictive? I've seen some people say it might be, so that will have to be tested out in playtesting. The few restrictions on some of the feats as well, I feel like also take away some of it. For instance, Qriken common spell just seems a bit like not that powerful. If it did like half the damage that the spell did, for instance, that could be cool. Qriken spells like being once per day, stuff like that. It's just not sure how great that is. I love Magus still. I think they're great, but overall, it's going to put them in a weird place. Because if you want to be it puts them in that place where, like, if you want to be a full caster, you may as well just play a full caster. And if you want to be a martial, just be a fighter or a champion or whatever. Giving them access to the 9th level spells does help them quite a bit, but will it play out in the long run? I'm not sure. So my final thought is, this class likely will be a pretty good class. I mean, I don't think they won't replace your wizard or your arcane caster or whatever school caster in terms of being your like primary magic user, but to give you that little utility, to give you that kind of like almost like a rogue, that ability to kind of help in the battle, but help also out of the battle. Another thing you also note as well is that the majority of the feats involve them attacking. There's not much like outside of that in terms of utility that they get. There's a familiar. For the most part, it's all buffing either the spellcasting stuff, so the general feats will come into play to kind of help flesh them out a bit. I still think they'll be interesting. Maybe buff up the spell slots. I'm not sure how this will work, but go look. What do you guys think? If you guys have play tested this Magus in your game, either you've made one, your party's made one, or you're a DM and you've made an NPC one, let me know. How has it been? Post it in the comments down below, and I'll be curious to know. I'm gonna try and make one myself as well for a one-shot whenever we get around to it, and see how that one plays out. So thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode, which will be going into the Summoner playtest, and that one, as you know, is going to have quite a lot going on with that one. Thank you guys for watching.